Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning we'll be talking a bit about one of the Buddha's discourses from the Samyutta Nikaya. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll speak a bit about the sutta, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the sutta for today is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 47, sutta number 7, Makata Sutta, discourse on the monkey. So there's a few different similes of a monkey, which we find in the suttas. This particular one is a bit less well known, but it's quite an interesting metaphor that the Buddha is using here. So I'll start by reading from the discourse, and I'll give some explanations as I go along. And feel free to put in questions at any time, and I'll take them at the end. So I have here both Bhante Suddhāso's translation and also Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. Starting at the beginning, so it says, presumably this is the Buddha speaking. It says, monks, in the Himalayas there are regions that are rugged and impassable. In some such regions, neither monkeys nor humans can go, while in others, monkeys can go, but not humans. There are also level, pleasant places where both monkeys and humans can go. There, hunters lay snares of tar on the monkey trails to catch the monkeys. The monkeys who are not foolish and reckless see the tar and avoid it from afar. But a foolish and reckless monkey goes up to the tar and grabs it with a hand. He gets stuck. Thinking to free his hand, he grabs it with the other hand, and he gets stuck. So at this point, both hands are stuck. Thinking to free his hands, he grabs it with a foot, and he gets stuck. Thinking to free the hands and foot, he grabs it with the other foot and gets stuck. Thinking to free both hands and both feet, he grabs it with his mouth and gets stuck. And so the monkey, trapped at 5 points, lies there moaning. He is met with tragedy and disaster, and the hunter can do what he wants with him. The hunter spears him, carries him off on that block of wood, and goes wherever he wants. And the Buddha says, that's what happens when you go out of your territory into the domain of others. He says, so monks, don't roam out of your own territory into the domain of others. If you roam out of your own territory into the domain of others, Mara will find a vulnerability and get hold of you. So this is the basic setup of the metaphor. So the image of the monkey trying to take hold of a lump of tar and just getting completely stuck. And so then the Buddha explains the meaning of this metaphor. He says, what is not a monk's own territory, but is the domain of others? It's the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. What 5? Sights known by the eye that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds knowable by the ear, smells knowable by the nose, tastes knowable by the tongue, and touches knowable by the body that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. This is not a monk's own territory, but the domain of others. So here the Buddha then is drawing a direct connection between the 5 senses, the 5 physical senses, with the trap laid for the monkey. So just as the monkey tried to grab hold of the tar with both hands, both feet, and its mouth. In the same way, we're constantly grabbing hold of sensual experiences with our 5 physical senses. And it's notable, by the way, that when the Buddha is talking about sensuality, he normally focuses on the 5 physical senses, excluding the mind. So the standard list of the 6 senses is eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. But when the Buddha is specifically talking about the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation, it's specifically the 5 physical senses, which is not to say that we can't get stuck in mental phenomena, in mental objects. But the Buddha is, again, emphasizing in particular the importance of being extremely careful with how we use our relationship to the physical world. And normally when we talk about sensual experiences, we're talking about something through the body, something that we experience through the body. I also find the imagery here of the tar quite relevant, in that the nature of tar is that if you try to grab it, then you instantly get stuck. So the Buddha is giving the same thing here. So when there's some pleasant, sensual experience happening, if we reach out to grab it, then we're going to get stuck. It's something adhesive, something where the mind easily gets trapped, it gets fixated, obsessed with sensual experiences. So the Buddha continues the metaphor. He says, you should roam inside your own territory, your ancestral domain. If you roam inside your own territory, your ancestral domain, Mara will not find a vulnerability or get hold of you. And what is amongst own territory, ancestral domain? And he says it's the 4 applications of mindfulness. What for? And here he gives the 4 standard descriptions of the Satipatthana. He says it's when a monk meditates by observing the body, keen, aware, and mindful, free of covetousness and displeasure regarding the world. Meditates observing feelings, the mind, and mental objects. So the 4 satipatthanas, so body, feelings, mind, and mind objects. Keen, aware, and mindful, free of covetousness and displeasure for the world. This is a monk's own territory, their ancestral domain. So this is interesting also because when we're talking about mindfulness of the body, for example, that naturally includes the 5 physical senses. So mindfulness of one's physical experiences, of one's physical sensations is included within Satipatthana. Also, being aware of one's pleasant and unpleasant sensations would fit also under Satipatthana in the section on Vedana. So what's the distinction here? Well, again, if we think of the case of the monkey is that it's not paying attention to what's going on. It just sees something interesting and grabs at it. And even after its first attempt to grab resulted in disaster, the monkey just keeps trying to grab at sensations, keeps trying to grab at experiences. By contrast, with the case of Satipatthana practice, we're observing our experience, but we're observing it in, as it says in the Satipatthana Sutta, we're observing it with an awareness of the arising and ceasing of those phenomena. So watching them come and go. We're observing it knowing that this is not me, not mine, not who I am. We're observing it with a mind of non-attachment, non-grasping. A mind which is not seeking to acquire an experience, which is not trying to, which is not fixating on the experience, which is aware of the sensations coming and going, but is not latching on to them. Similarly, with the case of sensations, one is aware of pleasant sensation, but also aware that it's temporary, it's unsatisfying, it's impersonal, and therefore not something worth latching onto, not something worth obsessing over. One is aware of unpleasant sensation, but again, recognizing that it's temporary, unsatisfying, and impersonal. Its nature is to arise and cease. So we're not bothered when painful sensations appear. We're not waiting for them to end, but we know that sooner or later they'll go away on their own. And with neutral sensation, we pay full attention without neglecting them, without ignoring them. So keeping the mind alert and non-reactive, regardless of what kind of sensations are coming and going. So in this way, one is not getting stuck. One is not getting wrapped up in sensory experiences. We're still fully aware of them coming and going, but we're not reacting to them. We're not latching onto them. So in this way, one is not getting trapped in one's sensory experiences. So it's notable here that the Buddha does not say that we should ignore or neglect our sensory experiences, but rather that we should be relating to our sensory experiences through the lens of, again, the Satipatthana practices, the mindfulness meditation practices of clear, non-reactive awareness, coupled with the knowledge of impermanence, the knowledge of the impermanent, unsatisfying, impersonal nature of those experiences. And in this way, one will not get stuck. So that's the end of this discourse. So a very short discourse with a potent metaphor. So we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Charles Lee, Rebecca, Monal, John, Vivian, Jayanta, another John, and Sud, as well as everyone else who's checking in online. And I see John has a question. John says, how are the 4 satipatthanas related? Can they be practiced together or only separately? Well, the 4 satipatthanas together give a complete picture of our experience. So it's one of the many frameworks that the Buddha gives as a complete outline of the experience, of our experience, and as a framework for investigating and understanding our experience. So the 4 satipatthanas are related in the sense that they together form a complete system, a complete outline of our experience. There is also some relationship between them in that in practicing mindfulness of the body, for example, one is aware of the sensations coming and going in the body. So then naturally, as one is aware of those sensations, one will be aware of the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral quality of those sensations. So the feeling satipatthana then tends to come in naturally with that. Also with the 3rd satipatthana, mindfulness of mind, this is referring specifically to attributes or characteristics of mind, the texture of the mind. There tends to be some Vedana aspect. It tends to be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, whatever is currently going on. So Vedana is also connected with that. And the mindfulness of mind and mindfulness of mind objects, the 4th satipatthana, also tend to be closely related. So all 4 of the satipatthanas have some relationship to each other. They tend to merge together a bit at the edges. They can be practiced separately, and that's normally at least how one starts, and that's how it's most commonly practiced, is to pick one satipatthana and focus on it. And also each satipatthana tends to contain within it multiple distinct exercises. Especially the 1st and the 4th one have many, many, many different practices contained within. So one can pick any of those individual practices. But they can also be practiced together because, as mentioned, there is some overlap between them. And also the more closely one examines one's experience, the more one sees that ultimately there isn't a sharp line between the different aspects of our experience. For example, mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of mental objects. Well, the body actually is a mental object. It's included within the things that are known by the mind. Also, the states and attributes of mind. These are things that are known by the mind. They're mental objects, mental phenomena. And everything has a Vedana. Everything is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So again, ultimately, all the Satipatthanas actually come together because we're talking about our moment-to-moment experience. And our moment-to-moment experience is actually a unified phenomenon. We can subdivide it for the sake of clarity, but our actual experience is not divided. Our actual experience is unified. So yes, they can be practiced together. And actually, one of the most direct ways of practicing them together is anamitta samadhi, in which one is not making any distinction between phenomena whatsoever. Then naturally, all four satipatthanas come together into one. But normally, in the beginning, and the beginning, again, might mean the first 20 or 30 lifetimes. So in the beginning, normally one practices them separately. And Bhavani says, clinging happiness very quickly. Maybe you mean clinging happens very quickly, or clinging to happiness happens very quickly. How to prevent that? Well, when your self-awareness is extremely sharp and clear, then you will notice the mind's impulse to latch on to an experience. And when you notice that, then you'll have a window of opportunity to stop the mind from doing that. But this depends upon very highly developed mindfulness and concentration. It also depends upon a well-developed faculty of renunciation and self-restraint. So without those factors in place, then yeah, you won't be able to stop yourself from fixating on experiences. What you can do, though, is as soon as you notice the mind has fixated on something, recognize, first of all, recognize that that's what's happened, that the mind is fixated on something. Recognize the painfulness of that fixation. Recognize the unsatisfactory nature of whatever it's clinging to, whatever the mind is latched onto. And try to just relax and let go of that fixation. So realistically, that's actually much of our practice. Much of our practice is not preventing the mind from fixating on things, but rather it's detaching the mind from something that it's already grabbed onto. Most of our practice time is actually spent doing cleanup, damage control, rather than prevention. But as time goes by and your practice becomes stronger and more refined, then you can start to prevent the mind from getting caught in the first place. And John says, I find it hard to meditate on kaya without a lot of Vedana interfering. Same thing with chitta. Is there a way to see kaya and chitta directly? I don't know what you mean by Vedana interfering. As I mentioned, every experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Literally every experience. So Vedana is always there. No matter what you're doing, Vedana is always there. So taking Vedana as one's primary practice is where one is focusing specifically on the Vedana aspect of one's experience. But whatever you're focusing on, there will always be a corresponding Vedana. There will always be pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. That's always present. So that's not an interference. That's just the nature of experience. And I don't understand what you mean by a way to see kaya and chitta directly. So body and mind are always right here. So seeing them directly, just pay attention. Pay attention to body, and there it is. Pay attention to mind, and there it is. It's never anywhere else, and you're always directly aware of it. It's just a matter of whether or not you're paying attention. And Nyanada says, what does a monk's ancestral domain mean in this context? So again, the image of the imagery the Buddha is using here is saying that you have your own territory where it's safe. where you know what's going on. And if you go outside of that territory, then it's dangerous. You might get trapped. So one's own ancestral domain. So the idea here is that to practice satipatthana, so mindfulness meditation focused on body and mind, is a place of safety. It's a territory where there's a long-standing tradition in place. So the ancestral domain. So ancestral domain would mean a place where your family has lived for generations. Like your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-great-great-grandparents, they've all lived in that place. So it's a place which is extremely well-known and extremely safe. And it's a long-standing tradition. So it's well developed tradition. So in the same way, mindfulness meditation has that sense of something which is long-standing, well-developed, refined, reliable, trustworthy, safe. So this is what's meant by a monk's ancestral domain. And Tannik says, I just pretend my life is like watching a show and that I have nothing to do with anything that's going on. Is that healthy to deal with attachment and aversion? Well, look at the results. So seeing your life as like watching a show, that can be a way of practicing anatta sanya, the recognition of non-self. However, it can also be a way of not taking responsibility for our own choices. So it's like, well, I'm just watching myself as I steal from those people. I'm just watching myself as I physically assault someone. I'm just watching the show as I cheat on my partner. It's like, well, no, you're not watching a show. You're actually making deliberate choices. So we need to be careful when we talk in this way. It's like, well, is watching your life like watching a show unfold? Yeah, it kind of is, except you are also making deliberate choices, and those choices create karma, and those choices shape what direction the show goes in from here. So our life is actually a mixture of passive and active. In that, yes, we are observing the unfolding of the consequences of past actions, and that we can't do anything about. That is, in fact, like watching a show. But at the same time, we're also making choices which shape the direction that things move in. And if we make the right choices, then the show moves in the direction of awakening. And if we make the wrong choices, then it will just become increasingly confusing and disturbing. So there is a place for that kind of practice of just observing one's life as a show. That does have a place, but we need to be careful that we're not using it as an excuse to avoid responsibility for our choices. Rebecca says, when my mind fixates strongly on something, I've been trying to contemplate death, and it seems to allow more contentment with what I'm experiencing. Is this a good way to go? It can be. I often use recollection of death as a way to keep the mind from getting caught in trivial things, because it really does give some perspective. So yeah, look at the results. If it's helping you to have more contentment, as you're saying, then that's good. Yeah. That's the last question online. Anything from the residents here? Yeah, go ahead.
What is tar?
Tar, it's black sticky substance. Have you ever seen when they're fixing roads and when they're first like putting down the road base, it's this like thick, gooey, glue-like substance. And then it hardens into like the hard black surface that you drive on. But when they're very first putting it down, it's very like sticky, gluey, gooey stuff. So that's what tar is. Yeah. Okay, and Randall asks, what is the difference between non-attachment versus dissociating? I think dissociating is a term used in Western psychology these days, and I am not a student of Western psychology. So I actually don't really know what they mean by dissociation, but I know that it's a bad thing. In Western psychology, dissociation is a bad thing. I just don't know exactly what it means. Do you know what is dissociation?
I would associate it more with apathy.
Apathy.
Like it's, I don't, well, maybe that's not good. The event's still occurring and you're almost like it's too much for you to endure, so you disassociate from it instead of seeing the inherent nature of anicca dukkha. Seeing the universal characteristics and letting go.
So like spacing out in order to avoid facing your experience.
Even stronger than spacing.
Okay. Yeah, so then Randall, if I'm understanding this correctly, then Randall clarifies, they say it's when you're not present in the body. Yeah, that's not Buddhism. So, okay, and Rebecca says dissociation happens when there's trauma and the mind can't handle it, so go somewhere else. Okay, this is all becoming clear. Yeah, so non-attachment, you're still fully, clearly aware of what's going on. You're not trying to escape the experience. You're actually fully, intensely, clearly aware of what's going on, but you're not reacting with either desire or aversion. So this is a product of wisdom, the wisdom which knows that this experience is impermanent and impersonal. It's just a natural phenomenon. There's nothing inherently wrong here. It's just a natural occurrence. And we're still staying completely, fully, intensely aware. So this is critically important to understand. So in Buddhism, we're never trying to space out or distract ourselves or daydream or wander off into some other hazy state. We're actually trying to be fully, intensely, clearly, wisely aware of exactly what's happening with a calm, serene, content mind. Okay, and that's the last question. Okay, good. So we can go ahead and conclude it this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.